Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TaskHuman Talks. I'm your host, Jamie Carroll, and fellow wellness provider on the TaskHuman app. And today we've got Bruce Arendt, and Bruce is a financial wellness coach. So thank you, Bruce, for joining me today to talk about
Happy to be here.
everybody's favorite topic.
Always happy to talk about finances. So
Yeah, let's talk about money.
yeah, let's talk about money. It's
Talk
never
about
an
making more
uncomfortable.
money.
It's never an uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah, right. And you help people with financial health.
Right.
What does it mean to be financially healthy?
Well, I think it's a spectrum, right? So each person kind of has their own idea of what financial health is, but to kind of generalize a little bit, I think definitely kind of the lower end of things is are you able to cover your needs, right? So are you able to cover your housing, your food, kind of your general health would be kind of the lower end of financial health. And then as we move up, it's kind of looking at savings. Do you have savings to cover maybe unexpected expenses? Do you have enough finances to maybe purchase a home? And so it kind of goes up from there. So again, it's kind of a spectrum for the individual. And definitely we could look at individuals versus couples versus families. And as you go through those kind of different stages of life, right, financial health is going to look a little bit different. But definitely, one thing that I always kind of advise clients is sort of this idea of the rainy day fund, right? And especially now in these kind of trying times where we're seeing maybe more people, out of work, working multiple jobs, sometimes having that cushion, right? So having a little extra money saved up is going to carry you through more difficult times. And that's part of that wellness or part of that health that you can have. Of course, that takes time to kind of build up. And so that's one of the things too, is financial health is the setting of the goals. So just like a mental health or physical health that you have, right? There's a lot of similarities with those. And it's kind of this holistic approach of health, right? And it doesn't come overnight, right? It doesn't just happen, right? It's something that you build upon, and that maybe you set kind of short-term goals to save so much money, and you're always kind of working on that health. It's probably never going to be finished, similar to anything that we do, right? Right, yeah. I wish I could stop exercising, but if you don't exercise, right, then you don't reach that. So it's kind of similar. So I like to kind of put it in that perspective of it's continually ongoing process of kind of reaching, maintaining health, reaching the health that you want. And so that's kind of the main part of it.
And you work on the TaskHuman app with individuals and couples and families figuring out their financial health?
Well, currently it's just been individuals. So I haven't worked on the TaskHuman, but I'm happy to work with couples. I think that's a big part of financial conflict within a partnership. I think you could probably look at the statistics, but one of the main reasons of divorce is finances, right? And I think it's a very difficult topic to talk about. It's very sensitive. Oftentimes there's a discrepancy. If you have two people in a relationship, there might be a discrepancy in income, right? And so that can kind of create this power imbalance sometimes. And so that can also cause conflicts. One of the things I find particularly interesting is sort of how our upbringing or our backgrounds can influence how we think about money. So it's just like anything, our parents have an influence over us, our friends, relatives, siblings, and that kind of carries over as we get to adults and we have to take care of our own financial issues. Our perspective on financial awareness, I'll say, is based upon what we know and what we've learned from all of those people. And so that can be, sometimes there's good aspects of that, but sometimes there can be negative aspects of that too. And that then when you bring that in with a partner, that can cause some conflict. And I think the important thing is with couples is to recognize that, right? So, okay, so this is why you do what you do. And this is why I do what I do. And so we're kind of
Question,
so there's
I
a
have
little
to interrupt
conflict.
you here.
Yeah.
I want to interrupt you here. So ideally, and I know you're not a relationship coach, but ideally when you're working with people, like this is something that we should we be knowing about people's spending habits
Definitely.
pretty early on in the relationship?
Yes, definitely. I think, and
Just
that's
knowing what they spend money on and how they spend it,
and that's part of that community. Yeah, exactly. Because that if you decide to continue with that relationship, right, those things are going to come up eventually. Be it if you decide to, legally become partners, be married, and that you share those finances, you buy a house together, you share rent together, a car loan. You kind of need to know that because that's what's going to cause that conflict, right? If one person is spending all of the money that they're earning and they're not contributing to the well-being of the household, that's a huge conflict that you might be having. It doesn't mean people can't change, right?
Right.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's just one person doing the change, right? Generally in a relationship, you're both going to have to compromise to kind of reach a point where you both feel okay about the situation. You may not both feel ecstatic about it. But yeah, it's a big issue. And, kind of as we mentioned in the beginning, finances are a very difficult thing to talk about. They're very personal. We don't ask people how much they make. That's a question that is, you don't do it. And so that is, it could be kind of our society, sort of our cultural norm not to talk about it. So even when we are in intimate relationships, it's not something that we talk about. So kind of overcoming that barrier.
Is that something we should be asking? How much money do you make? Like if we're in a relationship, if we're in a serious relationship, you ask, are there questions to ask?
I think it's important to have a good idea of perhaps what the person is making, if you're serious about that relationship.
What are you making, and what do you like to spend your money on?
And you may already know the answer to one of those questions. So
right.
And I think too, Jamie, it's important to kind of talk about, asking each other what their financial goals are. I think that's a good way to kind of maybe start that conversation, because it's not necessarily asking for a specific number like, hey, what was your last paycheck, right?
Yeah.
More of, in 5 years, where would you like to be financially? What would you like to do? Those are kind of questions that then can maybe open up more of a intimate conversation.
I love that, Bruce. Forward thinking questions when it comes to money and your relationship. Yeah, that's really good, actually.
Yeah, because that's something that's a little easier to answer, no matter who's kind of answering that question. And it can be turned around too. And then, I could answer that question and say, well, how about you? Where would you like to be in 5 years, financially? And then you can kind of see, do we have a similar mindset as far as where we want to be financially? And you don't necessarily have to limit yourself to, 5 years is just kind of an arbitrary number. But, 1 year, right? What would you like to do 1 year? Where would you like to be financially, and decide.
I guess this is a question that you could always come back to as well, in a marriage, even just kind of sitting down and talking about those finances. Where do you want to go in 5 years? Or what do you want to be, where do you want to be financially in another 5 years,
Well, and I think that's a great point, because as we go through kind of our relationship and sort of this family development, right, different things happen, right? You have children sometimes, and your financial goals might change. It might be, well, we want to send them to college. We want to save money so they can go to college, right? So
Right.
they don't have to take out a lot of loans. And so then it's shifting a little bit as far as what your goals are. Or retirement. Retirement is a big one.
Right.
What do you want to do in retirement? Well, I just want to stay home and, take care of my dog. Okay, that's different than, oh, I want to travel. I want to go live somewhere else. So that's a little bigger expense, right? And so how do you manage that difference? And so it's
I
always
love
it's always a good conversation, kind of see where you're at, and within those, there's that compromise, right? Like, where do you kind of
it.
come together to make that happen? And also
Awesome.
being realistic. Is it possible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I
With
want
any
to segue
goal.
into retirement since we
What's
started,
that?
you brought up retirement. So let's
Yeah.
kind of segue into retirement. What, okay, so individuals, couples, whatever. When do we need to start saving for retirement?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think the earlier the better, generally. My kind of personal philosophy is slow and steady. So I kind of think
Okay.
of the tortoise and the hare. I'm more like the tortoise. I just kind of, you keep saving and you keep going, and over time, right, you kind of use time to your advantage. By the time you get to that retirement point, you've saved up enough money, you're comfortable, you're where you want to be financially. So, if you can start early, if you have some income that you could set aside to do that you're not sort of, I don't know, sacrificing other needs that you have,
Yeah.
then that's a good time to start, right? But of course, that's not everybody.
Yeah.
And so, if you are kind of starting a little bit later and you still want to, have enough money to retire at, let's say, 67, it's kind of not, probably where, when we retire, that's probably the Social Security age.
Mhm.
Then you want to think about investments that are going to kind of get you there. And within those investments, you might have to take on a little more risk depending on sort of how much you need to retire, or that you want for retirement. So there's a change in that, right? So you're taking on a little more risk perhaps to get a little more money for retirement. And so that's kind of the trade-off that you have. So definitely starting early, but anytime is good. And
What?
one thing that I do want to kind of point out is that while we're always generally talking about financial investments,
Mhm.
I think, really taking that holistic approach. And one of the best pieces of advice that someone had given me was invest in yourself, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the best investments that you can make. And that can be things like that are non-monetary, things like your health, right?
Yeah.
So exercise, eating right, things like your mental health, education, right? So investing in learning things, just kind of expanding upon that. So I think that's a good point, is when we talk about investing, certainly financial is big, right? But there's also other ways to kind of invest. And I think that's important to recognize too.
Yeah, that's a really great point because most, people, if you're with finance, when I'm working with a financial person, I feel like they're not ever asking me, "Are you investing in yourself?" So I love that you brought that up. And so, if someone is wanting to start a retirement, and I'm sure there's so many different retirement accounts, right? But what's a good retirement account to set
Well,
up,
I
like
think
to
one
get?
of the best, certainly one of the best places to look is with your employer, right? So does your
Okay.
employer offer some type of retirement account that you can put money into? That's probably the best place to start, especially if they do some matching funds.
Right.
Let's say that, as things are kind of moving more towards, a lot of people are doing, the gig economy, right? So maybe they have a couple
Yeah.
different jobs, they're independent contractors. There are some other avenues for that. There's some IRAs, which are good.
Okay.
There's also some 401k, some individual 401k plans that you can start. And really thinking about tax benefits, right? Because those things all have tax benefits, either kind of lowering our taxes or deferring the taxes that we might pay on it. So the
Yeah.
less, I hate to say it, but the less money the government can get, the more money you get, right? So those are good avenues to kind of think about.
So with that, is it better to have an IRA where you are saving on your yearly taxes, or having that deferment when you pull out all of your money? Or is it
Yeah,
going to
and so that's
depend on?
so it's kind of depends on the individual and how you want to treat it. But so there's the Roth, right? So there's the Roth IRA, and then sort of the traditional one. And so those are kind of the two that you're talking about, where the Roth IRA is I pay after taxes, right? So once I get my paycheck, I have my money, and I take that money and I put it into a Roth, which grows for 20 years. And then after that, any money I made on it is tax free, right? Like, so I don't have to pay taxes on it. So there's a great benefit to that. And that in particular is kind of nice, because if you think you are going to make more money when you're retired, that's a nice benefit, right? So I'm not paying taxes on that money. The other one is the traditional one, right? Where it will give you a tax benefit when you put it in, right? So this
Right.
year I can lower my income if I open up a traditional IRA. So there's that benefit. So if I have quite a bit of income this year and maybe I want to lower that for tax purposes, I would probably do a traditional IRA. So it kind of depends. I've done both, but I prefer the Roth. I
Okay.
think it has maybe a few more benefits. I can use it at a certain age. I can't remember if it's maybe 55 or 50. I can take money out
Okay.
without a penalty. Don't quote me on that one.
Okay.
So there's benefits to kind of letting it grow. But either one, I think is good to invest in. It just depends on sort of the tax benefits, that if you want them now versus if you
Yeah.
want them later.
Okay.
But
Awesome.
that's a good place
And
to start. So
yeah.
even though you might have a workplace, kind of retirement fund that you're contributing to, you can still do a IRA, so that could be
Right.
an additional form of investing for you. Yeah.
Yeah. Are other investments right now? I mean, I feel like we're living in crazy times. And it's like, what's going to happen in the world? Is now a good time to be investing into, some of these like markets or even the IRAs? Like what is
Yeah.
your
I mean,
thought on the risk of all of that?
I don't know, I think this kind of goes back to kind of the general philosophy of, consistency.
Yeah.
So, if we are investing every month, we're kind of spreading out our risk, right? So while the
Yeah.
markets may be a little bit high now, we're investing our money. If they continue to go higher, we've invested at a bit lower. If they go lower, right, we're still going to be putting money in there. And so that's why it's kind of the long term. And that's why time is our friend, right? So the more time
Okay.
we have, the more opportunity we have to kind of level out those investments. And historically, the stock market has increased. There's been dips with the recessions, of course, but they've
Right.
they've always sort of rebounded. And I'm not an economic or investment professional, but I would anticipate that probably would be true going forward. And so that sort of dissipates some of that risk that we might take. If I were to have $10,000 and put it into the market today versus spreading it out over 10 months at $1,000 each month and investing, I would much rather prefer to spread it out, just to kind
Right.
of smooth out some of that risk, perhaps, that I might infer, or that might incur from the
Okay.
market. So I think you want to keep investing,
Okay.
every month, put some aside, but you also have to feel comfortable. I think that's one thing that's important to stress, is you don't want to put yourself in a position where you're continually stressed about your investments, right? Or
Yeah.
what the money that you're putting into things if it's causing so much anxiety and stress that it's having an impact on you,
Right.
then by all means don't do it. It's
Yeah.
not something that we all have a comfort level, right?
Mhm.
Certainly when I was perhaps younger, I would take on more risk. I wouldn't,
Yeah.
now we see a lot of the cryptocurrencies that are kind of
Right.
popping up. Well, if I were younger and I didn't have a family, yeah, maybe I would invest some money in those. But now I'm not that interested in investing money in those types of avenues. And so, again, it's where you feel comfortable and, what are you okay maybe losing some of the money, and being, recognizing that, well, the market may take a downturn, but I'm going to keep investing and
Okay.
eventually the market
Eventually
will
it'll go back up.
upturn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when it comes to these IRAs, um, you can put in as little, right, amount as you want or as
I
much.
believe so. I'm not sure about the minimum amount. There is a max amount that you can contribute. I believe it's 6,000 now for an individual, and you can do a
Okay.
catch up. So if you're 50 or older, they have like what they call a catch up. Uh, what's the word I'm looking for? I just lost my word. But you can add, it's like an additional $1,000 that you can invest
Okay.
in the IRAs. Yeah. So
Okay.
there is a limit. And so that could be something that, people that are independent contractors, if they want to invest more money, right, they may look at some other avenues, just kind of like an individual 401k that's open, that allows you to invest a little bit more money. Yeah.
Okay. And so for someone out there that's listening that is younger and maybe does want to take on a little bit more risk, so would you recommend looking at crypto? Like what else would you recommend that they look at as far as
I'm not going to recommend anything necessarily, but I think
look into?
no, I don't want to get into that business. I think cryptocurrency is interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's a possibility. Technology is always
Hmm.
something that's kind of booming. We're going interesting places. I think just with kind of the COVID thing happening, we've
Yeah.
seen a lot of cloud-based things, meeting type apps really kind of exploding, and that may be something that's just continued on. These type of meetings are convenient for a lot of people, and that might be an avenue. Technology, we're seeing driverless cars. It's kind of
Yeah.
what does the future hold for us, right? But
Crazy.
I think
Yeah.
that's I think it's important to maintain some type of diversification.
Hmm.
So again, taking on, if someone were younger and they wanted to take on a little more risk, maybe kind of some things like real estate, offices, houses, buying those, renting those.
Right. Okay.
That takes a lot of, it takes a lot of effort. I mean, it takes a lot
Yeah.
of commitment. But yeah, I'm not going to tell anyone what investment to invest in.
No
But the one
recommendations. You
thing
guys
the
will have
one
to
thing I would
call
say,
Bruce.
yeah, the one thing I would say is really kind of take advantage of
Yeah.
the workplace retirement programs that a company might have if it's available to you.
One thing I want to go back to too is you had mentioned earlier having a rainy day fund.
Mm-hmm.
And how much should we be setting aside? I know it's going to depend on how much we're making, but like, what's a good rule of thumb? Like, how much do we want to have in a rainy day fund?
Right. So one way of kind of starting is really to analyze your expenses, right? So
Uh-huh.
start to track your expenses during 1 month, because that will give you an idea of how much money you'll need to basically survive for 1 month. Can you
Right.
cover all of those expenses? And so based on that 1 month expenses, anywhere from 3 to 6 times that will be kind of your rainy day fund.
Okay. Okay. Um, Awesome. Thank you. So analyzing expenses and 3 to 6 times your expenses would be a good amount to have into a rainy day fund. Okay. One thing I
Yeah,
also wanted to ask you about is credit card debt.
yeah.
Is credit card debt quote unquote bad?
Well, it
How
depends
important
on.
is it us for it to be like staying out of credit card debt? I mean, of course, I know what you're going to say. It's going to depend on how bad your credit card debt
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you, I think I think you want to avoid carrying that debt past the point, past the 30 days, right?
is. Okay.
So, because once you get to that point, the interest really starts to add up. So you want to, I think credit cards, there's some benefits to them, of course. They're easy to use. We don't have
Right.
to carry cash around. It kind of prolongs the payment. There are benefits to, hey, I can build some, my credit report.
Mhm.
I can build that a little bit. Also, some of these today's credit cards, they have some financial benefits. You get cash back, you can get
Right.
airline flights, those kind of things. I think the important thing to remember is you want to pay it off every month, right? So if you're
Right.
using it, you want to make sure that you have the money to pay it off when it's due, right? You don't want to
Okay.
carry that past that initial due date. That's where you can get into problems.
Right.
Let's say, but if by chance, you do get into owing quite a bit money to the credit card company or companies. A lot of times people will carry multiple cards.
Right.
Use one card to pay off another card, and that's
Right.
that's where it gets a little bit tricky.
Okay.
And you want to avoid that too. There are some organizations that will consolidate those types of payments and help you get back on track with those. So if for example someone is in kind of deep debt and doesn't think that they can pay it off in a I don't know fairly quick time, then that may be something that they explore, just to try
Okay.
to get them out of that hole a little bit and pay a little bit less interest. Yeah, so it's you can get yourself in trouble with them, but they're also a good way of kind of managing your money, understanding how much you're spending,
Yeah.
and use them as a way of kind of avoiding using cash and checks and maybe debit cards and those kind of things.
Okay. And reap some of the benefits as well they may have.
Yeah, yeah, but you have to be disciplined, right? You have to have a good
Yeah.
idea of how much you can spend and what you spend it on.
Yeah.
Do you have enough to, if you have to buy a new refrigerator that costs $2,000, do you have enough saved up, which, and kind of referring back to our rainy day fund a little bit,
Yeah.
if you have that rainy day fund that you could kind of pull out some money from to cover that expense, then you
Okay.
pay that credit card off and build that rainy day fund back up to where it needs to be.
Okay. And that rainy day fund, that 3 to 6 times your expenses, that's a monthly. That's like what you want to have in there monthly in your rainy day fund. Like
Yeah.
each month, 3 to 6 times,
You
what
want to
your
at least
monthly
try.
expenses are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course things happen, right? Um, where you might have to expend quite a bit of money and pull from that rainy day fund, but then the idea is to kind of build it back up again.
Okay. And
Yeah.
one of the things you mentioned was with credit cards that it can build up your credit. So without credit scores, um, what if someone is out there, who has a really bad credit? What are ways to build up your credit score?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think making sure that if you do have some type of payments that you're making, make sure that you pay them on a regular basis. That's one of the big things that will kind of hit you. Contacting the credit company. Certainly, they can give you some ideas of what you might be able to do to kind of get that credit score up there. Also, if there's any kind of outstanding debt that you can pay off,
Okay.
pay that off. They really kind of look at, are you missing payments? Are you carrying a large amount of debt on, let's say, a credit card? Have
Okay.
you applied for a lot of credit cards?
Okay.
Anytime there's kind of inquiries on your credit, it kind of can count against you. So really kind of being more fiscally responsible, and slowly building that credit number back up again.
And that's what I wanted to ask too, is what can ruin our credit? One of the things you just said was applying for a lot of cards.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that is?
Yeah, I mean, anything like missing payments will do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had heard somewhere too, and I can't, this was a while ago, that if you like canceling cards or something, like if you, and I don't know.
suppose, I'm not sure the impact that would have on your credit score. It may impact it some. I'm not sure how they calculate all that. I think it would kind of common sense wise, canceling a card that you have a zero balance on probably isn't going to impact you a lot. If you cancel it and it continues to show a balance, even though you've canceled it, it doesn't mean that you don't owe on it, right?
Right.
That could be a negative. That could negatively affect your score, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
Okay. So, what are some basics that we can begin doing, right? So we talked about goal setting, as with any sort of like health and wellness. Financial wellness is gonna, be setting goals for ourselves. And what can we do to start setting goals?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to where we were talking about that rainy day fund is really the more information we can have about our finances, right? The easier it's going to be maybe to set some of those goals. So if we have a goal of, let's say, just setting up a rainy day fund, we want to start with setting up 3 months for our rainy day fund. So we need to have a good idea of what our income is, right? What our expenses are, and can I pull anything from that? And so documentation, sort of what I would call a spending journal. So no matter when you spend money during a certain month, you're writing it down. I think the process of actually putting pen to paper or pencil to paper is very informative, right? Because as you well know, Jamie, probably, we can keep things up here and we can kind of have a general idea, but it's easy to move things around up here. Like we can tell ourselves one thing and do something else, but the idea of actually putting the numbers down on a piece of paper and looking at them and understanding what's happening is it's very concrete, right? We can't, certainly we could take an eraser and erase it, but we're probably not going to do that. And so that gives us a good picture, right, of where we are. And then, kind of again, setting maybe that goal of, I want to start putting money into a savings account so I have it there for whatever I might need. How much can I put towards that savings account, and sort of making it automatic, right? And so one goal that you might have is, well, every month I'm going to put $100 into the savings account. It's automatically going to happen. We have the, online banking is pretty easy to do now. It's easy to set up reoccurring payments. We do a lot of payments online. And so that's one of the things too, I think that's really important, is sort of make it mindless in those activities that we're doing to save or to put money aside, just like we would with investing perhaps at our workplace, where the money kind of comes out automatically and we're not necessarily thinking about it. And so I think that's a good place to start, is really the more information you can have about kind of your daily habits and where's the money going. And so that also lends itself well to creating a budget, right?
Okay.
So, where are you going to spend your money each month, right? Where's it going to go? Kind of sticking to it. And I think that's, kind of going back to working with a partner or a spouse, kind of being on the same page about where's our money going and creating a budget. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to kind of sit down, look at all of the expenses, look at the income, write it down, because it's not, most people don't think that's fun. Like I would say, I don't know if I think that's fun. And so and so we avoid it, right? And so,
Right.
so it's pretty easy to avoid. And partially because we have a lot of that information that we can just access, right? I can just go into my online banking and I can kind of see where the money's going, and I kind of have a general idea. So it's easy to avoid. But I think that's one of the things that, when we talk about kind of the financial wellness coach, that's one of the places that that's someone that is kind of not close to the individual or the couple can kind of come in and help get that going, right? So using someone else to kind of initiate that process can be beneficial. And so, that's another good activity, not just for individuals, but also for couples, is to kind of work on what does our budget look like. Also kind of feeding off what are our goals, and we had talked about that earlier of, people talking about, well, in a year, I want to have enough money to buy a car. Okay, well, let's work together on our budget and allocate this much money towards the car so we know that we have enough, right? And so that's another good activity. Go ahead.
Do you recommend if people are saving towards something like a car, like putting it in a separate savings account or something for those things?
I do. I think it's nice. I think it's nice to just keep it separate, because otherwise, if it's in the same pot, it's easy to kind of say, oh, we've got this here, let's just pull it out. And so, opening up a savings account sometimes can be beneficial to kind of put that money a place where it's not necessarily going to be touched. It doesn't mean you can't get to it, right? But it is just enough. Sometimes it's enough of a barrier to eliminate taking out of it. Okay.
I love that. And what do you see on people's expenses when you're helping them with expenses? Like, what are some things that people are spending money on that we can eliminate, that maybe we should look at, you know what I mean? Like, because one thing I looked at recently was like, oh, I'm subscribing to Hulu, to Netflix, to this, to that. Like, maybe I can get rid of some of these, So even though it's a small amount per month-ish, I think everything just went up in price, but it's a small amount per month, but like those types of things. Are there
and I think I think that's a good point. You have to be sort of willing to sacrifice, right? So if I want to cut my expenses, it means that I have to make a sacrifice, right? So there's that trade-off. So you kind of mentioned Hulu and Netflix. I don't know if I could get rid of those. Like that's like in these times, right? There's not a lot that we can do, right? And so, $14 a month and sort of like, well, that's my entertainment. Versus, do I go out to restaurants anymore? No, I'm not eating out. So if it came to, well, once things kind of open up and, everybody's going to more restaurants, we're going to movies, theater, those kind of things, then it may be, okay, I'm going to kind of give up Netflix. But if, let's say that I was really focused on putting a little extra money away, even if it was $25 a month, and I wanted to get rid of Hulu and I wanted to get rid of Netflix, which are good examples, right? A lot of people carry probably one of those or two of those. And I have to kind of weigh that. Like, is it worth it to me? Okay, if I don't have those, what am I going to do? Well, I'd probably actually be more productive, but I could probably get a second job and make more money. But
no, these are good though. Things to think about.
Right, and so it's kind of that trade-off, right? Am I willing to do that? So that's a big one. Kind of entertainment. We could kind of group that into entertainment, right? What sort of things are you willing to give up, and still maintain kind of your life as it is? And on the reverse of that, we kind of already mentioned it a little bit. You don't necessarily need to decrease your expenses. You could increase your income. And so that's where, maybe working a little bit more might come in, right? I want to have a little extra money so I can put it into a savings account, or I want to buy a car in a year and I want that money to go towards that, but I don't want to give up anything that I'm doing. Well, then that means, okay, you have to have more income, or it could mean, oh, I'm going to work some overtime, or I'm going to ask my boss for a raise or a promotion and try to make a little bit more money, or change careers, right?
Yeah.
So all of those things, kind of offset that balance a little bit. And so, general expenses too I think there are, other ways that you can kind of cut down on things. I think the biggest one we've already talked about is entertainment, dining out. Food is getting quite a bit more expensive.
Yeah.
I always, one of my points is always food waste, right?
Mm.
So buying food that you're going to eat and make
Yeah.
sure that you're eating it. I was just in our local food co-op today, and organic food is very expensive. But as a family, that's an important investment to make into
Right.
organic food. But you don't want to see it to go to waste. Like you don't want to throw out an organic apple. That's like throwing out $1.50, right? It's just like
Right. Yeah.
it's done, it's run. And so those are places that we don't normally, I think we don't normally recognize.
Mm-hmm.
But when we are cooking food or eating food and we're putting it into the garbage because we didn't eat it all, or it's old, it sat in the back of the refrigerator, I always see that as just you're just kind of throwing that money out there. So being more aware of that, I think, is important. And I think as a society, we should probably be more aware of that too. Just kind of the waste that
Sweet.
we
Yeah.
see with food. Yeah, I mean, we're lucky that we have the amount that we do, but it can be a way of reducing some expenses. So
Yeah.
those are all
Absolutely.
kind of things that are a little bit, kind of things that you don't normally talk about when thinking about reducing expenses, because it's already paid for. You've already, it's already in the refrigerator, and so it's kind of a done
Mhm.
deal. But you can focus more on that too.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, this has been really great. Is there anything else, when it comes to our financial health and wellness, so to speak, that you want to share with everyone?
I don't know.
Any
We've
like
talked about so
tips?
much already. I
I
think
know. Yeah.
it's been a really good discussion. I think it's just, I think it's kind of goes back to the beginning, right? Sort of this idea of financial health, and it's a, it's a movement, like it's fluid, right?
Hmm.
And keep in mind that just starting to think about it, starting to have a conversation about it, starting to recognize your own kind of habits, things that are working, things that aren't working, and
Yeah.
taking advantage of maybe some programs that are available that people may not be taking advantage of. So that's about it. Yeah, I think that's a
Yeah.
good kind of way to wrap it up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so if you guys
Mhm.
out there, if you need help with setting up that rainy day fund, setting goals, getting a retirement account set up, even starting a conversation with your significant other, make sure you reach out to Bruce on our Task Human app. All right. That's it for this talk. Thank
All
you so much,
right.
Bruce, for joining me. This has been
Hey,
really awesome.
thanks,
I've
Jamie.
got some takeaways from this. I hope you guys did too. Yeah, and I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.
All right. Goodbye.